Well, greetings once again, poetry lovers, and welcome to the video presentation on one of my favorite Robert Frost poems, Mending Wall. And the subtitle for this presentation is something about a poem that made two poets want to fight each other in the back of a New York City cab. And I will tell you about that as we go along. So let's go ahead and start with our reading of Mending Wall by Robert Frost. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I've come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean. No one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time, we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again, to keep the wall between us as we go. To each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves and some so nearly balls, we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side. It comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well, he says again, good fences make good neighbors. All right, so I first encountered this poem 40 years ago or more when I was in high school. And so I'm going to, I'll tell you as I move through the poem what my high school teacher's interpretation of this poem, specifically the line that appears twice here, good fences make good neighbors. Okay, so let's think about a couple things here, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background. Though the god of boundaries they named Terminus wasn't invented by the Romans, he nevertheless became one of their household gods. And the festival of the Terminalia was celebrated both in Rome and in the county on February 23rd, not too long past. Neighbors on either side of any boundary convened at the landmark, as in the stones which mark boundaries, with their wives and children and servants, and crowned it, each on his own side with garlands, and offered cakes and bloodless sacrifices, though in later times a lamb or suckling pig was sometimes slain and the stone sprinkled with the blood. Lastly, the whole neighborhood joined in a general feast. Now, what I'm going to tell you is it's unlikely that Robert Frost would have, this legend would have been unknown to Robert Frost because he was a student of the classics. Okay, so what I'm going to propose as something for us to keep in mind here that goes to the central elements of interpretation of the poem is this. So Frost has created, for this little pastoral tableau, two characters, the narrator and the neighbor. Okay? So given that, I'm going to ask you to comment on this maxim, good fences make good neighbors, as it pertains to each man. Okay? So some of the things we're going to think about have to do with what's the narrator's attitude toward repairing the wall particularly since he's the one that initiates this exercise to, quote, set the wall between us once again. And then I'd ask this, is it possible that the poet, Robert Frost, who was not much of a farmer himself, if you've read anything of his biography, and I've got a gigantic biography of his, he wasn't much of a farmer, although he loved the pastoral New England landscape and so forth. And he really wasn't even regarded as a New Englander. I mean, he was well aware of this, sort of in the way that T.S. Eliot was well aware that that Englanders didn't consider him a true Englishman, despite the fact that he, gave over his American citizenship and became a British citizen. Is it possible that Frost is engaging in a little self-deprecation in the poem? Okay, so let's take a look at the opening. If we want to look at some of the formal elements, I think it, as you heard me read it, and I hope that I read it in a way that you're able to easily pick up on this, you've got basically 45 lines of decasyllabics. So we've got 10 beat lines for pretty much all 45, except for there are notable exceptions. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 9 exceptions to this this decasyllabic orientation, and these are hendecasyllabic or 11 beat lines. Now we've talked about the fact that whenever there is a divergence from the regular pattern that the poet establishes, the first thing you want to do is A, make note of it, and then B, say, well, what the heck is happening in the line, sort of thematically as it relates to what the poem is trying to put forth as its central impulse or central thematic concern. And I think what you're going to discover here is that every place where there is an extra syllable, there's something unusual that's happening with respect to the poem. So the speaker here is presented through a dramatic situation. Okay, and the dramatic situation then is the speaker and the neighbor gathering to or getting together to repair the wall. Okay, so Frost opens with this idea: something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun. Okay, so now he spends a good part of the poem musing on what could this be. And of course, if you know anything about, and we don't get it that much here in the South, in Memphis, where I'm currently located, but further north, when you get the freeze and the thaw, any water that shows up in cracks in the cement or in chinking of brick, or any mortar that's put between say stones in a stone wall or something of that nature, that when the water freezes, of course, it expands. And then as it goes through this sort of expansion and retraction as the temperatures change, all right, then there's an instability that's created. Okay, so what he's suggesting here is that it's nature. Okay, so nature that, quote, doesn't love a wall. So we think about the wall in a couple of different ways. One is that it represents something like order. Okay, the way that a wall would have been put up is that, okay, so you've got New Englanders that are eminently practical about things, and it's hard for us to conceive of, and having lived up in New England for a number of years myself, it's difficult for us to imagine that how rocky the soil is in places, especially in New England, where there's a lot of granite and so forth. Okay, so when you're clearing a field to plow it, so irrespective of what it is that you're going to be planting, when there's rocky soil, you got to do something with the rocks. And so what generally happened was that these rocks were put and made stone stack walls. Okay, so if you've ever tried to make a wall out of stones that are irregularly shaped, there's a certain art to it, an ability to see spatially, and because I've got stones and rocks and so forth just spread out all over the place, okay? And as I stack them up, I see a gap here, and oh, there's a stone that's going to fit that weird shaped gap and so forth. So the wall would have been relatively wide, because to make it, so when I'm talking about wide, I mean, you know, you're talking about probably a 4-foot wide wall, because anything narrower than that is going to potentially, you know, tumble really easily, especially if you're talking about a wall that's more than about, oh, I don't know, you know, 4 or 5 feet tall. Okay, so you're probably not going to put something much higher that than what it would do to keep, you know, cows in. Okay, so and he mentions this this earlier. Okay, that we put the walls up there to keep the cattle from going on one property to the next. Okay, so he says here that makes gaps even 2 can pass abreast. So in other words, it seems very, you know, odd to imagine how it's possible that a wall as thick with stone as the one that that Frost is mentioning here in the poem could be destroyed to such a great extent that 2 people standing next to each other, so let's just say that that's roughly 6 feet wide, could pass abreast, or as in next to each other. Okay, so in the first 4 lines, when he talks about, you know, something there is that doesn't love a wall. Okay, so this is the sense is that this is unnatural. Okay, that it's a human invention, and it goes against the sort of fluidity of the natural world. Okay, so the work of hunters is another thing. He says, I've come after them and made repair when they have left not one stone on a stone. So if they're out with their dogs hunting, and the rabbit that they might be pursuing, you know, finds a gap in the wall, and so in order to try to root it out, especially if it has maybe has a den in there or a burrow of some sort, so smart rabbit selects a place where his the burrow is going to be protected by the stone and so forth. Okay, but if the dogs are after the rabbits, and if you've ever seen, you know, dogs like Jack Russell Terriers, I mean basically any kind of terrier, is a dog that is bred and has the instinct to what's called go to ground, meaning that it will go into a burrow in pursuit of, you know, whatever kind of you know, varmint is in there. So it could be a rabbit, could be rats. I mean, you know, rat terriers and so forth. So think about about most terriers that have this sort of stubby tail. So think of that as a handle. Okay, so the dog goes into the burrow and snares the varmint that's in the burrow, and then the hunter can then grab the dog by the tail and pull it out. Okay, I know it sounds cruel, but you know, and whether that hurts the dog or not, I'm not going to go into that direction. But let's just say that that's what the tail's used for. Okay, as like a handle. Okay, so. But they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean. Okay, so the speaker, and Frost does this quite a bit, is musing, you know, while he's talking, he's also thinking, okay? So the thing that he's going to have out of hiding to please the yelping dogs, the gaps, I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made. So it's as though the speaker is addressing not only himself, but someone who doesn't understand. Okay, and we get this idea as we progress through the poem that that Frost is presenting kind of a double audience. It's the audience of the person that is talking to himself, because notice that in terms of the dramatic situation, he is making these sort of universal statements, and then recounts, as we walk toward him, recounting the business of repairing the wall or putting it back together with his neighbor. Okay? But at spring mending time, we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. Hear that regular rhythm of what's happening, okay? So I guess this is line 8, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding. So this is that hendecasyllabic line, and it suggests that there's something. Again, the rabbit is using the man-made thing to protect itself, and yet the dogs are going to ground trying to find it. Okay, so we got to. It's important for you to imagine a New England winter. Okay, so when I lived up there, the sort of downcountry sobriquet was in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine. You've got 9 months of winter and 3 months of poor sledding. So imagine if you were out in a rural environment, okay, on a farm, how far away your neighbor is. Okay, they are not right next door to each other. All right, they are again depending upon the size of the farm that we're talking about. It is unlikely that even in summer would neighbors get together. Okay, because they're going to be busy. Again, when you've got a relatively short growing season, there's just a lot to be done, and you ain't got time to socialize with your neighbor. Okay, especially if we're talking about the men that are going to be responsible for most of the field work. Okay, and we'll leave what the women are doing all winter long in terms of household stuff and whatnot, and the essential tasks that women have on the farm. We'll leave that alone for the time being. Okay, and just say this: that if you're stuck inside for most of the winter, and your travel is going to be between the house and maybe the barn to check on livestock. And so forth, that you're going to do, several times a day. It's cold as you cannot imagine up there, all right, and snowy. So again, you're not going to trudge over to your neighbor's house during the winter. So the idea that you're not seeing your neighbors for long stretches of time, and even in the summer, your paths might cross, near the wall or whatever, and you might, throw up a hand to wave. But again, because you're busy, it's unlikely you're going to engage in long conversations. Okay, so like I said, it's important to get this for context's sake. All right. So I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, meaning, Charlie, we got a bunch of holes in the wall that need to be repaired. Now, in service of my interpretation of this poem, and this is what caused the fight between the two poets in the backseat of a New York City cab. The common interpretation is that when the old man, okay, the neighbor, says, "Good fences make good neighbors," the suggestion, and this is what my high school English teacher said, or this is her interpretation, is that the old man is saying that by putting a wall between us, it keeps us from interacting, and that's good. Okay, that we are in a land of sort of rugged individualism and independence and so forth, and so you stay on your side of the wall, I'll stay on my side of the wall, and everything is going to be better as a result. Okay, now I'm going to suggest that there is another way to interpret that. All right, and as we walk through it, this is what will emerge through our analysis. Okay. And on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go. This is an important double line here for Frost because he basically repeats it. It's like a refrain line, and so I think he is trying to. It's a red herring of sorts. Okay, the idea that we keep the wall between us once again. Well, of course you do, because if you don't and you start to repair the wall, then one person or the other is going to be stuck on one side of the wall, right? So I work my side and put the stones into the wall. You work on your side and put the stones in the wall, and together we build the stones, because the sense is that they have not fallen on one side or the other, but rather haphazardly. Or if it's the hunters or whatever, on each side, each to each. Okay? Let's see. To each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves, and some so nearly balls, we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. So you can tell that the speaker is is sort of lighthearted, kind of a little of a jokester, and we know later that he's got the spring has brought the mischief in him. So the idea that that you haven't, even though you may have worked hard to get these loaves and like cannonball-like things to balance, and you've wedged them in or whatever. Again, there's the sense that no matter what you do, they're going to fall anyway. And so, again, it's the humor that's supposed to be inherent in this idea that you're going to look back as though it takes some kind of magic to make the stones stay. Okay? We wear our fingers rough with handling them, which is odd because you'd think, well, don't you wear gloves? I mean, but anyway. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side. So this example of ekphonesis, which is the exclamation of "oh," he's again speaking aloud and trying to make sense of what it is that they're doing, which he's going to come to here in a second. Which is why do we have to do this? Okay. One on a side. It comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. So he's saying. The idea is that he's the implicit pointing or saying there is a place along the where the wall runs between our two pieces of property where you don't quote unquote need it, because as he says, he is all pine, as in he has all pine trees on his side, and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pine. So you see, this is humorous, yes, because like. Right, you're essentially animating. You'd think it's the opposite, wouldn't you? That the pine cones wouldn't, or the pines wouldn't want to eat the apples because the apples are the edible thing. So again, this is suggests a sense of humor in our speaker. Okay, so my apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines. I tell him. He only says, "Good fences make good neighbors." The suggestion before the quotation from the neighbor is, can't we just be done? Can't we be done with this? Like, does there really need to be a wall here? I mean, do we really need to like put these stones up and whatever? Because, we're not talking about livestock. So he says it. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Meaning that if his cows wander so if the neighbor's cows wander onto the speaker's land or vice versa, then, we're not sure whose cows are whose and whatever, okay? So I've got pastures that I want to, feed my animals on and vice versa. And so, okay, that's the only situation that the speaker, who is we're to understand is not the same as the neighbor. Okay, so I'm going to drop a new idea into you that the speaker represents this sort of modern New Englander, maybe the kind of New Englander that is not from generation upon generation upon generation of New Englanders that are out in this sort of environment, and that the old neighbor is old New England. So the speaker is implying a certain criticism that the old man, as the old New Englander, doesn't want the newcomer to encroach on not just the land, but on the traditions and the culture and the whole thing. Okay, that's part of old New England. Old New England. All right? Oxymoron, I think. Okay, so then he says, why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows, but here there are no cows? Before I built a wall, I'd asked to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. So the speaker is addressing the issue that if you build a wall, you are doing it to create division. Okay? So this is where my high school English teacher so the poets that I'm talking about, Michael Waters, who's one of my poetry professors at my MFA program at Drew University, and he says that he's in the back of the cab with the poet Edward Hirsch. And Hirsch has the same opinion, from an interpretation standpoint, as my high school teacher did, which is you build the wall because I really don't want you to encroach upon, my business, all right? Waters, on the other hand, says that's not why they're building the wall, and at least in terms of what the old man thinks, and that's not what he means by good fences make good neighbors. So, something there is that doesn't love a wall that wants it down. So he's repeating, yes, what he began with. So he's suggesting that for all our efforts, they're going to be ultimately to nothing. All right. I could say elves to him. Elves meaning that this is the supernatural force that's responsible for having pulled the wall down, that elves are mischievous, okay? But it's not elves exactly. So when I heard Michael Waters give a talk about this particular poem, he suggested that if you say it quickly, I could selves to him, as in selves, as one of the things that doesn't want the wall, that it's people, okay, not nature, as one of the other things. But it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. So if you get the sense of a tableau, right, with this old, weather-beaten man who's got the stone over his head because he's putting it up onto the uppermost part of the wall that they built, which again, now we get this sense that if this were a really low wall, he would never need to pick it up that high. So he has to take it overhead if he's going to drop it on top of the wall that's probably what? Like shoulder height, maybe? Something like that, because they can still see each other and talk. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees, meaning that the speaker is suggesting that the old neighbor is dim-witted, yes, and that he is stuck in an ancient past, not only in the way that he has portrayed him looking, but the way that he thinks. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well, as in remembered it, so well. He says again, good fences make good neighbors. Now, the interpretation of this poem that I like best, and I think that the content of the poem bears up, is this. Given all the things that I said at the beginning about the New England winter and the demands of an agricultural life, even when it's summer, and how busy you are and how much you have to get done because the growing season is so unbelievably short, it's that the only time that these two men, that neighbors, are going to get together is when they put the wall back up. That otherwise there would be no occasion, not an occasion that most people, particularly most men, are going to admit to in the land of rugged individualism, that I need human contact, that I need to expand beyond the sphere maybe of just my family, my wife and my kids. And so without the wall, again, there's no reason for them to get together. And so this is Michael Waters' interpretation that he's trying to sell Eddie Hirsch on, and Hirsch is not having it. And so again, like death, taxes, religion, I guess religion and taxes or money. People argue about stuff, and this is the thing that as Michael said later, he's like, he was just getting angrier and angrier about the fact that how could I be so stupid as to misinterpret this particular poem. But again, dear friends, I would ask you to consider, given the evidence that we've covered, that really, and especially if you take into my the comments that I made earlier about the Roman god of boundaries, and how since antiquity people met early in the year, okay, to bless the wall, to have this sort of whether it's a celebration or whether it's some kind of ritual around the wall, is that this has been a part of human experience for millennia. And so in the end, I think that the self-deprecation that I asked about is that in the end, I think the speaker, and this is the part that we don't get to see because it's something like an open ending here rhetorically, is that it takes the neighbor saying it twice. So notice how often there's repetition in the poem, and I'm not going to go back and unpack that because I've already been talking long enough. But there are so many figures of repetition in this poem of all sorts. Not the least of which is the regular meter and all the acoustic devices within the lines. Lots of alliteration, lots of assonance and consonants and so forth. We don't have the kind of rhyme scheme that's regular at all. Okay, but if you will note the lines, I'm just going to point this out last before I go. The major departure from the usual, from the pattern that was set up, which I argued for, is the decasyllabic line. So in addition to line 8, it's also then in line 18. We have to use a spell to make them balance. Okay, it's an 11-beat line. So the idea how unusual that is. Okay, so that speaks to the that 11-beat line. And then he is all pine and I am apple orchard. Here are the discordance in that line. And again, it's 11 beats because it reinforces the idea that there's no good reason for us to put the wall up because there's nothing that's going to cross and eat or invade the other person's property. And then there's 3 lines in a row. 25, 26, and 27 are all 11 beat. And eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. Okay, so here's the upstart, kind of long-standing New Englander telling the old man something. Okay, he only says good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder. All right, so he should be behaving with more deference. The speaker should be behaving with more deference toward toward his neighbor, and not poo-poo the sort of philosophy of the old man and his father. So then we go back to the regular 10-beat line, and then when he says this is a line like 37, but it's not Elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. So again, this is the upstart speaker trying to assert his superiority, show the old man how wrong he is. All right. So then we get to the end. He will not go behind his father's saying. So another 11-beat line, and the reason it's 11 beats, and the reason he won't go behind his father's saying is because it's true. All right. He says again, good fences make good neighbors, and so we end with the audience, having to interpret whether or not the speaker's learned anything. And my suggestion to you, good friends, is that he has learned that what the old man means by this is not walling people out or walling people in. Rather, that the wall then and that yearly ritual serves to bring them together. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I'll see you soon.